2 a.m. The only light in my Chicago penthouse came from my laptop screen. A notification pinged, shattering the silence. Subject: urgent personnel. Request. Sender: James Miller. My father. He thought he was emailing T.J. Sterling, the faceless venture capitalist who just acquired his failing logistics company. He had no idea he was writing to the daughter he threw out like garbage 5 years ago. I clicked open. It wasn't a resume. It was a plea. "I need to keep my salary," he wrote, "to cover the debts left behind by my thief of a daughter who abandoned her family." My pulse didn't even spike. In my line of work, panic is just inefficiency. I leaned back in my leather chair and stared at the lie. He wanted mercy. I would give him an audit. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I closed my eyes and the hum of the server room in my Chicago office faded. Suddenly, I was back in Ohio. The air smelled of stale beer and lemon pledge. It was 5 years ago, my 18th birthday. I hadn't expected a car or a party. I knew my place in the Miller household hierarchy. But I had expected a cake, maybe a card. Instead, I got a black hefty trash bag tossed at my feet. My father James stood in the doorway of my bedroom, his arms crossed over his chest. "You're 18, he said. His voice wasn't angry, it was bored. It was the tone of a man taking out the recycling. Legal adult. My obligation ends today. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wad of crumpled bills. He counted them out into my hand. 2 5s, 2 1s, $12. Bus fare to the city, he said. Victoria needs this room. She's starting a YouTube channel and she needs the natural light. I looked past him. My mother Jessica was in the kitchen. She was scrubbing a pot that was already clean. She scrubbed so hard her knuckles were white. She heard every word. She didn't turn around. She didn't say, "James, stop." She just kept scrubbing, washing her hands of me. Victoria was leaning against the hallway wall, scrolling on her phone, already mentally measuring the space for her ring light. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't ask where I was supposed to go with $12 and a high school diploma. I realized then that our relationship wasn't familial, it was transactional. And in his ledger, I was a depreciating asset. I was taking up square footage that could be invested in the golden child. I packed the bag. It took 10 minutes. I owned 3 pairs of jeans, 5 shirts, and a laptop I'd bought with money from cleaning neighbors' gutters. I walked out the front door without looking back. The door clicked shut behind me, and the sound was final. It was the sound of a contract expiring. Sitting in my corner office, 5 years later, looking at the city lights sprawling beneath me, I realized something terrifying. If James had been a better father, I would be a nobody. If he had let me stay, if he had given me a cake and a hug, I would have stayed in that town. I would have gotten a job at the local grocery store. I would have married a boy from high school and lived a small, suffocating life, grateful for scraps of affection. His cruelty was a gift. He didn't just kick me out of his house. He kicked me out of the cage. He forced me to become a predator in a world of prey because I had no safety net to catch me. He gave me $12 and I used it to buy my freedom. Now, staring at his desperate email, I knew one thing for certain. He liquidated his investment in me too early. And now the market had turned. I didn't become a CEO overnight. There is no montage of success that skips the grit. For the first 6 months in Chicago, my address was a locker at the Greyhound station and a sleeping bag tucked behind the HVAC unit of the public library. I learned very quickly that hunger sharpens your senses. When you haven't eaten in 2 days, your brain stops worrying about social anxiety or fear of failure. It only cares about survival. I didn't have the money for a college degree. I didn't have the connections for an internship, but I had something better. I had the library's free gigabit internet and an obsession with efficiency. I taught myself Python and C++ because code didn't care who my father was. Code didn't care that I smelled like dry shampoo in desperation. It only cared if the logic was sound. I became obsessed with logistics. I watched trucks gridlocked on the highway and saw wasted money. I saw empty shipping containers and saw inefficiency. I realized that the entire American supply chain was held together by duct tape and fax machines. So I built something better. I wrote an algorithm to optimize freight loads, reducing fuel costs by 30%. I didn't write it for a grade. I wrote it because I needed to sell it to eat. That was how I met Susan. She was a venture capitalist who happened to be giving a talk at the library's entrepreneurship center. I cornered her by the coffee machine. I didn't have a business card. I had a crumpled printout of my code and eyes that hadn't slept in 30 hours. She didn't call security. She looked at my code, then she looked at my shoes worn through at the soles, and she smiled. "You're hungry," she said. "I like hungry. People with full bellies don't disrupt industries." Susan wrote me a check for $50,000 that afternoon. That was the seed for Vortex Chain. For the next 4 years, I ceased to be a human being. I became a machine. I worked 20 hours a day. I hired engineers who were smarter than me. I slept in the office. I didn't date. I didn't make friends. I poured every ounce of my trauma into the company. If I stopped moving, the memories of that night on the porch would catch up to me, so I ran. By 23, Vortex Chain was the premier logistics software provider in the Midwest. We were lean, fast, and ruthless. But we needed assets. We needed a physical fleet to test our new autonomous dispatch system. That was why I authorized the acquisition of Heritage Haulers. It was a cold business decision. Heritage was a dinosaur. Their stock was tanking, their management was bloated, and their technology was from the 90s. But they had trucks, 500 of them. Buying them for $4,800,000 was a steal. I signed the paperwork without even looking at the personnel files. It wasn't personal. It was just an asset strip. Then 3 days ago, HR sent me the roster of redundant management marked for layoffs. I was scrolling through the list, sipping my espresso, looking for costs to cut. And there it was, row 42. James Miller, regional manager, 10 years of tenure. Salary $102,000. I froze. The coffee turned sour in my mouth. I hadn't bought this company to find him. I didn't even know he worked there. He had changed jobs right after I left. But looking at his name on my screen under the column labeled expendable, I felt a shift in the universe. Fate hadn't just handed me a trucking company, it had handed me the gavel. I didn't delete the email. I printed it. I needed to hold the physical weight of his lies in my hands. The paper felt flimsy, but the words were heavy, with a specific kind of toxicity I hadn't tasted in years. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, holding the sheet of paper up against the backdrop of the Chicago skyline. "Dear Miss Sterling," it began. He was addressing my mother's maiden name, the alias I used for the holding company. "I am writing to plead for my position. At 54, with a wife in poor health and a family to support, this job is my lifeline." It started as a standard corporate beg letter. But then the Trojan horse arrived. The third paragraph wasn't about his sales figures or his management style. It was a story. A carefully crafted, weaponized sob story designed to smuggle his incompetence past my radar by disguising it as tragedy. "My financial situation is dire," he wrote, "due to a family crisis 5 years ago. My youngest daughter, Taylor, fell into the wrong crowd. We tried everything, rehab, therapy, tough love, but she was beyond saving. On her 18th birthday, she broke into our safe and stole $5,000 in cash before running away. That money was our nest egg. The emotional and financial devastation she left behind broke my wife, and we have been struggling to pay off the debts she caused ever since." I lowered the paper. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. $5,000. Rehab. The wrong crowd. A laugh caught in my throat, sharp as a paper cut. I had left that house with $12 and a library card. I had never touched a drug in my life. I was the student who stayed late to clean erasers. But James couldn't tell people he kicked his straight-A daughter out because he wanted a man cave or a studio for his golden child. That story made him look like a monster. So he rewrote the script. He turned me into a villain so he could play the martyr. For 5 years, while I was starving in libraries and building algorithms, he was at neighborhood barbecues, garnering sympathy as the poor, devoted father of a thief. He had monetized my absence. He had built his social standing on the grave of my reputation. This email wasn't just a lie. It was a strategic asset. He was banking on the empathy of a female CEO. He thought Miss Sterling would read this, feel a pang of maternal instinct, and keep him on the payroll out of pity. It was manipulative. It was grotesque. And it was the final nail in his coffin. Any lingering hesitation I had, any tiny biological instinct whispering that maybe I should just reassign him to a different department, evaporated. He wasn't just a bad father. He was a liability. A man who could fabricate a felony to cover his own mediocrity was a danger to my company. If he lied about his daughter to save his job, what was he lying about in his ledgers? The distance from the window to my desk felt like crossing a courtroom. I didn't type a furious rebuttal. I didn't reveal myself. Not yet. I needed him to walk into the trap willingly. I opened my calendar and sent a single invite. "Mr. Miller," I typed, "your personnel review is scheduled for 9:00 a.m. tomorrow via Zoom. Attendance is mandatory. Prepare your financial reports. I hit send. The trap was set. He thought he was fighting for his salary. He didn't know he was about to face the plaintiff, the judge, and the executioner all wearing the same face. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was nervous, but because I was preparing. I treated the upcoming meeting with James Miller not as a family reunion, but as a hostile audit. I didn't rely on his incompetence alone. I knew men like him. They survived in corporate structures by being mediocre enough to avoid firing, but loud enough to claim credit. I needed more than mediocrity. I needed cause. I summoned my CFO at 4 a.m. Pull the expense reports for the Midwest region, I told him. Specifically anything approved by James Miller in the last 36 months. Look for irregularities in travel, client entertainment, and petty cash. By 7 a.m. The report was on my desk. It was an autopsy of petty corruption. It wasn't a massive heist. It was a slow bleed. A client dinner at a steakhouse on a Tuesday when the client was verified to be in London. Office supplies purchased from a vendor that turned out to be a Shell LLC registered to his home address. And the gas. The mileage reimbursements were astronomical. He was claiming to drive 4,000 miles a month for a job that was largely desk-bound. I did the math. $12,400 in fraudulent gas claims alone over 3 years. It was pathetic. It was small. But it was theft. He was stealing from the company to subsidize the lifestyle he pretended to afford, likely to pay for Victoria's influencer wardrobe or his own delusions of grandeur. At 8:30 a.m., I went into my private bathroom and changed. I put on my power armor, a structured white blazer that cost more than the car he bought Victoria. I pulled my hair back into a tight chignon. I applied lipstick, a shade of red that was bold, unapologetic. I looked in the mirror. The frightened girl with the trash bag was gone. In her place was a woman who could buy and sell his entire world. I walked into the conference room. It was a glass box floating in the sky. I sat at the head of the table alone. I placed the printed email on my left, the audit report on my right. I opened my laptop and logged into Zoom. I disabled my camera. I wanted him to speak to the void first. I wanted him to be uncomfortable. I wanted him to sweat. At 8:59 a.m., the notification popped up. James Miller has entered the waiting room. I took a sip of water. I didn't let him in immediately. I let him wait for 2 minutes. Let him check his connection. Let him adjust his tie. Let him worry. At 9:02 a.m., I clicked admit. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," I said. My voice was calm, professional, and stripped of any familiar cadence. I didn't say, "Hello, Dad." I didn't give him a hint. "Good morning, Miss Sterling," his voice cracked slightly. "Thank you so much for meeting with me. I apologize for the delay. My internet is a bit slow out here." "Let's begin," I said. "I have your email in front of me. It paints a very vivid picture." "Yes, well," he chuckled nervously. "I believe in transparency. I wanted you to understand the unique pressures I am under." "We will get to the pressures," I said. "But first let's talk about the numbers." The screen flickered and suddenly there he was, James Miller, my father. He was sitting at the kitchen table, the same chipped oak table where I used to do my homework, the same table where he sat drinking beer while I scrubbed the floor around his feet. He looked older. His skin was sallow, his eyes rimmed with red, likely from stress or a sleepless night spent concocting the lies he was about to feed me. He was wearing a dress shirt that was tight around the neck, sweating under the harsh fluorescent light of the kitchen. I kept my camera off. On his screen I was just a black box labeled T.J. Sterling, a void, a judge in the dark. "Good morning, Miss Sterling," he stammered, adjusting his webcam. He forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this opportunity. I know the acquisition has been chaotic, but I want to assure you that I am fully committed to the new vision." "Proceed, Mr. Miller," I said. My voice was calm, detached. I didn't modulate it, but the sterile quality of the Zoom audio stripped away the familiarity. He launched into his rehearsed speech. He talked about his decades of experience and his loyalty. But I could see his eyes darting around the room. He wasn't focused. He was desperate. He was waiting for the right moment to deploy his shield. "I also wanted to address the personal note in my email," he said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I know it's unorthodox, but my situation is unique. My wife and I are victims of a severe domestic betrayal. Our youngest daughter—" He paused for effect, looking down as if overcome with emotion. She was a troubled girl. Addiction is a terrible thing. When she left, she didn't just break our hearts. She emptied our safe. $5,000. It devastated us. I leaned into my microphone. $5,000, I repeated. You filed a police report, I assume. James flinched. He hadn't expected a follow-up. Well, no. We didn't want to ruin her life. We bore the burden ourselves. That's the kind of people we are. You bore the burden, I said flatly. That is very noble. But I'm looking at a different set of numbers, Mr. Miller, and they tell a different story about who is burdening whom. I hit the share screen button. The audit report filled his view. Highlighted in neon yellow were the mileage discrepancies. According to this, I said you have claimed reimbursement for 48,000 miles over the last 3 years. That is an average of 43 miles a day every single day, including weekends and holidays. For a regional manager whose territory is a single warehouse district. James squinted at the screen. His mouth opened and closed. I visit clients. I'm very hands-on. We checked the client logs, James, I cut in, dropping the mister. You haven't had an off-site meeting since 2019. This is $12,400 in fraudulent claims. You weren't driving to clients. You were padding your paycheck. This is a misunderstanding. His voice pitched up, defensive and shrill. Clerical errors. My assistant must have logged it wrong. I can explain. There's nothing to explain. It's theft. He went silent. He stared at the black box on his screen. I could see the gears turning in his head, the cognitive dissonance firing on all cylinders. His brain was rejecting the reality. He was the victim. He was the good father. He couldn't be the thief. The voice coming from his speaker sounded familiar, a ghost of a tone he hadn't heard in 5 years, but he shoved that recognition down deep. Because if he acknowledged it, if he let himself realize who was holding the magnifying glass, his entire world would shatter. So he clung to his delusion. You don't understand, he hissed, anger replacing fear. I am a good man. I have been through hell. My daughter. Stop talking about your daughter, I commanded. Why? He snapped. What do you know about it? You're just some corporate suit in a glass tower. You don't know what it's like to be betrayed by your own blood. I think I said, reaching for the camera button. I know exactly what that feels like. I clicked the camera icon. My image flooded his screen. High definition perfectly framed the Chicago skyline gleaming behind me. I wasn't the teenager in a hoodie anymore. I was the woman who signed his paychecks. Hello, Dad. James froze. His eyes bulged. He leaned closer to his laptop screen, his breath fogging the camera lens on his end. Taylor. It came out as a wheeze. What is this? Why are you? Where are you? I'm in my office, James, I said. The CEO's office. Vortex Chain is my company. No, he whispered. He shook his head violently. No. You're a waitress. Or a junkie. You can't be. This isn't possible. It's entirely possible. I bought Heritage Haulers last week, and I just read your email. Taylor. He stood up so fast his chair toppled over. Panic replaced confusion. Baby girl, I knew it. I knew you'd make something of yourself. I told everyone. Ask your mother. He turned away from the screen, screaming toward the living room. Jessica, Victoria, get in here. It's Taylor. She's rich. She's the boss. He looked back at me, a grotesque smile plastered on his face. This is amazing. We can keep it in the family now. I can be your VP of operations. I know this business inside out. And Victoria, she needs a break. Stop, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through his babble like a knife. You're fired. The smile faltered. What? You are fired. For embezzlement. For incompetence. And for lying to a corporate officer. You can't do that. His face turned a mottled purple. I'm your father. I raised you. You housed me, I corrected, until I was 18. Then you gave me $12 and a trash bag. Remember. That was tough love. I was teaching you resilience. Look at you now. It worked. It worked in spite of you, not because of you. And speaking of housing, I picked up a file from my desk. I reviewed the company's assets. The house you're sitting in right now. It's collateral on a company loan you took out 5 years ago. A loan you never paid back. James went white. How? How do you know about that? I own the company now, Dad, which means I own the debt, and I'm calling it in. You can't, he choked out. That's our home. It's a company asset, and since you're no longer an employee, you have 30 days to vacate. Taylor, please, my mother Jessica burst into the frame. She looked older, tired. She shoved James aside and pressed her face to the camera. Taylor, honey, don't do this. We're your family. We love you. I looked at her. The woman who scrubbed a pot while I packed my life into a trash bag. Do you have $12, Jessica? I asked. She blinked, tears streaming down her face. What? Do you have $12? Because that's enough for a bus ticket. It was enough for me. It should be enough for you. Taylor, goodbye. I ended the call. The screen went black. The screen went black, and the silence in my office was deafening. I sat there for a long moment waiting for the crash. Waiting for the guilt, the regret, the overwhelming sadness that everyone says you're supposed to feel when you cut off your family. But there was nothing. Just the hum of the air conditioning and the distant murmur of the city below. I picked up my wallet. It was a sleek black leather designer piece, a far cry from the Velcro one I had as a teenager. I opened the hidden compartment in the back. Folded into a tiny square, worn soft at the edges, was a $1 bill. The last remaining soldier from the $12 James gave me. I had kept it for 5 years. I had carried it through homeless shelters, libraries, and boardrooms. It was my talisman, my reminder of exactly what I was worth to him. I unfolded it. The paper was thin, fragile. George Washington looked tired. I stood up and walked over to the shredder in the corner of my office. I fed the bill into the slot. The machine whirred a sharp, decisive sound, and the dollar disappeared, turning into confetti in the bin below. It was done. I didn't need the reminder anymore. I didn't need the anger to fuel me. I had built an empire on spite, yes, but now I would run it on ambition. I would run it on my own terms. I walked back to my desk and pressed the intercom button. Sarah. Yes, Miss Sterling. Tell legal to proceed with the property seizure in Ohio, and block any further calls from the Miller family. Understood. I sat down and opened my laptop. There were emails to answer, contracts to review, a logistics network to optimize. My father was right about one thing. I was a machine. But he forgot that machines don't feel pain. They just work, and I had a lot of work to do. If you've ever had to cut ties to save yourself, share your story below. You are not alone.